Did it fix it?
Fixed it.
Sweet. I have to reshare.
Thought we dropped into the multiverse there for a second, the way that picture was.
What the hell does that even mean?
What you getting at with the books? Quick, spit that shit out, man!
When I was your age, television was called books.
Wait a minute. What's your favorite book?
You got the hook!
In my hand, Doc! You got it in my hand!
Burn it!
Tells me that goose-stepping morons like yourself should try reading books instead of burning.
Welcome back, depending on if you've listened before, to Propaganda Loves You Book Club, Season 2, kicking off with Minority Rule. If you listen to the trailer for this, I won't reread the inside cover of the book here, but yeah, listen to our trailer for Season 2 reading book series if you want to kind of hear that, or if you've already got the book in your hand and you could read it yourself. There's a lot of options here. But I will just say one more time, Ari Berman as National Voting Rights Correspondent for Mother Jones and was reporting fellow at Type Media Center. He wrote the book, Give Us the Ballot. It was a National Book Critics Circle finalist. It covered, a lot of the modern assault against the Voting Rights Act, which has changed since even this book has been written. And I think I mentioned this in the trailer, but the reason that I picked this book, was one of the first ones that I kind of started listening to as I was digging more into how we ended up with the second Trump term. I think my takeaway from this book is I've listened to it, I think I said like 2 or 3 times at this point, and my takeaway this most recent time is different than it was the first time. Normally kind of wait to the end of our book series to give a roundup, but I want to give a thought up front of how my view of this book has changed a little bit. And then maybe by the time we get to the end, or maybe you guys have already discovered this on your first read through, we'll see if it changes for you guys too. The book chronicles essentially the backlash to the Civil Rights era and the Voting Rights Act, and basically a lot of the progress that's happened since the Constitution. And so I think when I was reading it the first time, I was really focused on what's happening right now, like watching this train wreck unfold on, the current timeline that we're in, and seeing like what occurred over the last 20 years to make that possible. But after reading our book, Dawn of Everything, and then also thinking about this more in the context of problems that have been occurring since the beginning of America as a country, and then even way before that, like just human nature, like a lot of these problems come in. So I don't know if this is weird or not, but actually reading this book, this most recent time, somehow made me more hopeful. That's basically the opposite reaction that I think I had the first time, but looking at everything at a larger time scale, looking at how this current moment that we're in is more of a reaction than a groundswell of its own kind of cultural shift, I think is kind of the way that I'm thinking of this, or the way I'm feeling about it now. So anyway, kind of wanted to start with that and get your guys' thoughts just on that statement. And then, today we're going to cover the prologue. We're going to talk about chapter 1 through 3. We're not going to do them individually. We'll kind of handle it as a group. But yeah, before we kind of get into anything, any big thoughts based off of what we read so far?
I love that statement. I think it's a great statement. I am a huge fan of rereading books that are important to you. You should never, if a book's really good, read it again. Read it a second or a third time. Read it at different points in your life, and like different connections get made, like you said, like all that stuff just kind of meshes together in the subconscious, and then you end up making connections to yourself, and you're like, oh wow, that's a totally new way of thinking about this problem that I didn't clock the first time around. And it's like, I don't know, it was just really cool to hear that your multiple experiences with this book combined with your other experiences with other things have totally in an interesting way reshaped the insights that you're taking from the reading experience. So yeah, read good books and read them more than once. I like that.
I think that's a great reaction. I can't add anything better than that. I would amplify that. Yeah.
All right. So what we're actually covering today of the book, we're going to be covering the prologue through the first 3 chapters. So I'll just read the chapter names for each one of these. But like I said, we won't treat them separately. We'll kind of treat this as a whole thing. So the prologue, Fear of a White Minority. Chapter 1, Laboratory for Oligarchy. Chapter 2 is The Fear of Democracy. And chapter 3 was called the New Nullification. So I think I kind of wanted to start with here, and what I was thinking about the most as I was listening to these first couple chapters, was a conversation that we've had on this podcast a ton, that Joe, you've started with most of the time, was like, is America a democracy? Is it really a democracy? And I felt like the first 3 chapters, or at least the first 2 chapters of this book, kind of plainly lay out that at its founding, America was never a pure democracy, despite whatever our rhetoric or our ideals or anything really state. And despite the Declaration of Independence stating that, all men are created equal in those ideals, that is not how the Constitution was set up in any way, shape, or form, and it's laid out very plainly. Like, it's not not a secret, right? Not a secret based off of the conversations that were had. So, I guess I wanted to play with that thought a little bit. Like, as you guys were reading these first couple chapters, what was the thought that came to your head when you were kind of reading through those initial chapters there?
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I thought about the country, like, I guess in the prologue, like framing it like, the majority minority issue, and like, how by, is it 2045, whites are going to become the minority in the US. And so anyway, I was thinking about that and how it's kind of like a media issue. Like, I don't really experience any problem with that at all. I welcome it, and zero hostility there. And then I thought about, like, does the vote actually matter? Did it ever matter? And then I thought back to like when Bush's governor, George W. Bush's brother, who was governor at the time in Florida, decided the vote of, like, that went to the Supreme Court about who was going to be the president. I thought, come on, this is tale as old as time. This has never mattered. So, cynicism.
Yeah. It's hard not to feel cynical about this stuff sometimes, because when you get into the history of it, it gets so depressing and demoralizing. Like, so much of our just grade school education about how the government works is just straight up propaganda. Like, we're instructed to believe in the democracy, and you read these books and you learn more about the history, and you think, we're celebrating 250 years of what exactly? What precisely are we celebrating 250 years of? So yeah, I mean, I still largely take Howard Zinn's view of the U.S. government, that it was a carefully constructed scheme by wealthy people in the colonial period to control the masses, and that's still largely how it operates, although there have been some moderate stages of progress along the way. It has become more democratic on its way to becoming a democracy, and hopefully one day it will be a real, robust democracy that we could actually brag about. I still think we haven't quite achieved it yet. But yeah, all this stuff was kind of percolating in the mind while I was reading these. I thought in the prologue, all the stuff about Pat Buchanan was interesting, because we have to be careful, especially when I say we, I'm kind of imagining the three of us, but a broader group of people who are opposed to right-wing fascism generally and are trying to figure out how to stop it. We have to be careful of how we talk about democracy and what we claim the country is or isn't, because if we claim it's a democracy that's been here for 250 years, we're setting ourselves up to be proven wrong. When people like Pat Buchanan say, and I'm just quoting from the prologue on page 8, Ari Berman quotes Pat Buchanan saying, the founding fathers did not believe in democracy. They did not believe in diversity. They did not believe in equality. And Pat's right about that. They largely did not believe in those things. So we have to have a strong rebuttal to the right-wing fascists who are saying, look, this is what America has always been. It's about white property-owning men and whatever concessions we give to other people. We have to contend with the facts here. That is what the country was at the beginning and what it's largely been since then. And so how do we make something meaningful happen now, given this situation that we're in, without resorting to, like, I don't know, this delusional ideal of a country that never has been the case? That makes sense.
What I think I liked about how Berman was kind of framing the argument was, like, pointing out everything that you're talking about there, Joe, right? Like, the Senate, the way that was stood up specifically to be an aristocratic, upper house, much like the House of Lords, right? The intent behind that. So yeah, like you're saying, it's very clear that there is a minority they're protecting there. It's the white property landowner minority that's being protected. But the way I read it this time and the way I viewed it this time is a little bit different. Like, yes, that was how it stood up, but there were others arguing the opposite. Like that Madison, was arguing that if you have 2 senators, then you've got a minority that can control the country. Like, so that was acknowledged. It was talked about. There were opposing views, opposing sides, like at the beginning of the, while the Constitution was created, which is kind of the thing I appreciate too, because like, no, we've never been a true democracy. We've made progress towards it. And I think in a way, kind of the book helps document the progress towards true democracy we've made by pointing out those that are trying to tear down those things, right? Like, by pointing out what's being, pulled apart now, right? Like, or what's being gone after now. When we talk about the Voting Rights Act or originalists going back to the original Constitution, what does that mean? Like when you say you are an originalist and you believe in the original interpretation of the Constitution, it means you don't believe in that other half, right? The other half, or we'll say half, right? I don't know what the actual split is, but the other half that believe in more of the ideals of the Declaration of Independence and, equal rights for all. Where was I going with that? Shit, completely lost the segue there.
I mean, it sounded like you were trying to talk about the progress toward democracy and sort of how originalists have to, again and again, tear down democratic institutions to make their case. I'm not sure if that's what you were trying to tease out or not, but that's kind of what I was hearing.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I was really trying to get to there was just that, like, this competing idea. I think this is where I had gotten, I either like just glossed over it or just was too focused on the now the first time. But like this competing idea has always been there, right? Like in the founding documents, in the creation of the country, we can see the anti-democratic tools that were put in place in the original Constitution, and we can see efforts to correct that, right, through the Bill of Rights, through like the different amendments that it actually gave suffrage and whatnot. Like, so we can kind of track the, as you were saying, Joe, the steps along the path of trying to become a true democracy. And now what we're seeing is basically that was laid out in the, I mean, there's more the rest of the book, but just the attack on that, right? That's the sense of the book. That's the purpose of the book and kind of what it lays out through here. And I think that's the piece that I was missing the first time, really kind of looking at it from, or absorbing that we're really talking about like that a central argument regarding the founding of our country, right? That we've never come to a conclusion on. Like this battle has been going on like with different levels of intensity basically since they generated the Constitution or created the Constitution.
Yeah, the other thing that strikes me is kind of weird about trying to wrap our heads around the origin of the country and whether or not we're a democracy and everything, is that the narrative itself kind of tricks all of us into identifying with the conversation. When we think about the proportion of who's actually having the conversation versus who's actually governed by the results of the conversation, you're talking about like how many people were in that room in Philadelphia debating all this? Like 40 guys?
Yeah.
And their conversations resulted in a system that governs and controls and punishes and colonizes, I mean, hundreds of millions of people now, but at the time it was like already grossly out of proportion to the people who made the decision. And so the rest of us who are outside of that room, when we become aware of the conversation, the way that the conversation is narrated to us, it kind of tricks us into identifying with being in the room, even though it wasn't we didn't have a say in it, you know what I mean? And so I want to get to a point where we're all actually starting to have the conversation together. And it's not just this elite privileged class of people who pretend to speak for everyone else, right? And I think that's really what that class is afraid of. And you can see that fear throughout the stuff that Berman is writing about. That's what they're afraid of, losing their protected minority status as the rulers over everybody. So yeah, that's just kind of the I don't know, a little mind trick I'm noticing in the way the conversation gets narrated. Made me think about something I heard David Graeber say in an interview one time. I don't remember what the question was. One of the authors of The Dawn of Everything, the one who's deceased, someone had asked him a question about war, or about some specific war, whether he supported it or whatever, and he was like, "Don't put me. I didn't make that decision. That wasn't me saying we should go to war. I'm not part of that. You guys are going to war. I'm not going to war." Like, he just kind of rejects that identification with the governing class in general.
this topic around the Senate and how that, is a anti-democratic institution, really, in the way that it's set up. There was the stat in there that I thought was pretty telling, right? The projection of that by, 2040, 70% of the population will live in around 15 states, 30 senators total that would represent 70% of the population. So essentially 30% of the country would be electing 70% of the U.S. Senate. So just to add the context of what that looks like, down the road, that's why it's considered an anti-democratic institution. Those individuals that have that representation from 30% of the country proportionally have way more power in practice just based off of where they live and how that institution is set up. Same issue that could be said for the Electoral College, right? Just the fact that we can have an election where the eventual winner loses the popular vote by 3 million or more votes. It's happened multiple times. Or how many people do we have on the Supreme Court that were put there by individuals who were elected by less than a majority of the voting population in a given election, right? All these things were being talked about back when the Constitution was created, and it was known exactly what these tools would do and how they were anti-democratic at the time. The second chapter, The Fury of Democracy, the way it was framed and the way that they had talked about it was basically like that Adams quote, right? Of, if popular rule were to be allowed and the majority of people could actually make these decisions, then they would lead us into chaos. And therefore the wealthy, smart, educated need to be the ones that are in control of this, right? I just think it's crazy, right? 250 years later, same exact problem, and we're not really closer to solving that, I would say. In fact, where we are today is trying to get closer to that originalist interpretation of the Constitution. So with the powers that be in there.
I get in the late 1700s, you might want senators for these small, tiny states because they're essentially independent countries, but now it's the population of Wyoming can fit into a neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it's the math just makes zero sense. And totally to your point, the Electoral College is way worse. It seems in the modern era of if we think of Clinton and Al Gore, the modern Electoral College results in any time it's challenged, the Democrat loses. Mm. Why is that? Why is that the power there? And why doesn't the popular vote it's just ridiculous. I'm curious if we do a research on the Electoral College and has it always been Democrats or the more progressive party that loses and is I don't know. It's really
that would be interesting to study all the cases where the person who became president lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College. There's a handful of those now you could analyze. But yeah, I'm thinking about this theme going back all the way to the Constitution, and you see it now today by elite people. I remember when I was younger, I used to watch Bill Maher's show, and I started getting kind of disgusted with Bill Maher because he would make this sentiment over and over again that he just thinks people in general are stupid. This idea that the general population is stupid and untrustworthy, and the average person is just an idiot. You can't trust them. It's the same sentiment that's coming back to this fear of democracy. But we have public opinion surveys and stuff, and you can see what people actually think and want in a general sense. And I thought that was cool. This is on page 26, but he's just kind of talking about all the Scott Walker stuff in Wisconsin and all the stuff going on there. And he writes on page 26, there was often a striking disconnect between what the wealthy and the rest of the country believed, particularly on core economic issues. According to one in-depth survey, 68% of the public believed the government in Washington ought to see to it that everyone who wants to work can find a job. But only 19% of the top 1% of Americans agreed. 54% of the public favored raising taxes on the rich to combat income inequality, but only 17% of the wealthy concurred. And so this is the chaos they're afraid of. This is the stupidity they don't want to be in charge, is a more equal distribution of the wealth that this country possesses. So anytime I hear someone express that sentiment that the average person is stupid or untrustworthy, I immediately try to push back against that because that's nonsense.
Yeah, we continue to see that in all And polling today, I mean, yeah, what are the most popular things? What have been, super popular for a very long time, but never implemented? And then the question is why, like, despite broad popular support. What I thought was interesting about the laboratory for oligarchy and for, I can't remember if this is directly in the book or not, but the way it kind of plays out is just how the states actually operate in that sense, where you can start something in one state, get it to take hold, and then it kind of like spreads through, if whether it's good policy or whether it's talking about what's going on here, where they've identified ways to use legal methods of capture of control of different institutions, right? And then that spreads. Like we're seeing that with the gerrymandering too, right? Like the plans were in place for different states. And so each of those states being a place where you can start one of these kind of initiatives or start a movement that would spread. I thought that was a fascinating way to, or look at ways that you can push back too. Like, and we've seen that from different states when it comes to, was it the medical like league that we talked about last year, I think, with Oregon and California for some of the different vaccination pieces, like if the federal government's not stepping up. So I guess, again, this is where, for me, it kind of like seeing the positive in the negative, it can give you a path there for how do you use these same institutions or same procedural loopholes, right, to try and push things back towards a democracy or a more democratic, government, I think. Well, you said, Arthur, a little bit ago about just the number of people at the time, right? Something that, those smaller states needed some sort of representation. So at the time of the founding, when they were having those conversations, I think the numbers were like Virginia had 12 times as many people in it as Delaware, which was the smallest state at the time. And today you're talking like California versus Wyoming. And I think California has like 68, 69 times the population of Wyoming. So like those structural issues that were built in at the time that may not have been as, it's compounding over time, I guess is the point. Like it's getting worse as the populations grow and as we limit how many representatives we can have, right? Like that's another, it's like we're talking about the Senate in the book, but the House of Representatives is the same issue when you're basically capping the number of representatives that states can have or that you can have in total. All you're doing is you're further cementing that advantage that those small states currently have when it comes to representation.
I'm not like a fan of Thomas Jefferson because I'm not a fan of any slave owner, naturally. But he had this quote that made me feel validated in all the democracy stuff that I talk about, because Jefferson said, talking about America's founding document, held that governments derived, quote, their just powers from the consent of the governed. This was the mother principle of the revolution, said Thomas Jefferson, that governments are republican only in proportion as they embody the will of their people and execute it. And this has always been my point about what democracy means. It's not just the consent of the voters, because we often will see, well, voters think this, voters think that. When we say voters, that is a smaller class of people than the governed. The governed is a much larger class of people than the voters. The voters are a subset within the governed. And to be a true democracy, you have to have at least a simple majority approval from the governed. And that's kind of the principle that I've been hitting on over and over again. The 170 million at least need to give your administration approval, and we're still nowhere near that. So I just thought that was a validating point about my idea about democracy.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, Joe, I want to actually read another quote that made me think of you as well when it comes to this, the whole argument around, America as a democracy and the founding and whatnot. So this is on page 55. So this is the second chapter, If You're a Democracy. It's talking about the 200th anniversary here. And so I'm just going to start reading from the top of that page. On September 17th, 1987, 250,000 Americans gathered in Philadelphia to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Constitution signing. There were fireworks and floats depicting the Revolutionary era. The U.S. Army Old Guard's Fife and Drum Corps, dressed as members of Washington's Continental Army, marched down Chestnut Street playing Yankee Doodle Dandy. Warren Burger, who had resigned as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to lead the bicentennial commemoration, rang a replica of the Liberty Bell on his 80th birthday. Standing in front of the statue of Washington at Independence Hall, where the Constitution had been signed, President Reagan praised the genius of our constitutional system and said, in a very real sense, it was then in 1787 that the revolution truly began. Quick quote, or not quote, but something I want to mention here. This isn't in the book. It's interesting that they chose that Reagan chose that date, 1787, saying this is when the revolutionary began, because if you look at the rhetoric of the Declaration of Independence, that's where we get the really famous quotes of like all men are created equal and all these rights, certain unalienable rights. And that's a problem when you devise a system that does not give equal rights to everybody. So it's a conscious choice to choose the Constitution as the starting versus the Declaration of Independence because of the rhetoric that's in that document, which is something that J.D. Vance struggles with. Anyway, all right, back to the book. Thurgood Marshall, the first black justice on the Supreme Court, issued a rare public dissent to the flag-waving fervor. The preamble to the Constitution began with the phrase, "We the people." But as Marshall noted during his speech in Hawaii, when the Founding Fathers used this phrase in 1787, they did not have in mind the majority of American citizens. Marshall challenged the oft-repeated platitudes about the unparalleled genius and foresight of the founders. To the contrary, he said bluntly, the government they devised was defective from the start, requiring several amendments, a civil war, and monumentous social transformation to attain the system of constitutional government and its respect for individual freedoms and human rights that we hold as fundamental today. I thought that quote right there was great, right? Like that helped, I think, like I replayed that one a few times just because it helped me kind of put all of everything that's being said in this book into the context, right? That I tried to bring up at the beginning, which is like, this is a conflict that has been going since the very beginning, and we've made progress. And now what we're seeing is the attempt to bring us back to that original interpretation of the Constitution. So I thought that quote was pretty fantastic.
Yeah, like every now and then a kind of right-wing person like Reagan or I don't know, any powerful kind of person you could point to in American history, they'll say something shrewd that lets you know that they're aware of some element of power that isn't really, spoken about in general. And so that comment about 1787 being the real start of the country, it's like, oh, what do you mean by that? Oh, that specific system of power that's allowed you and people like you to enjoy all this power over all these years. And got it. Yep. Clocked it. Okay. Not actually about democracy at all.
So one other spot that I wanted to take a second and read about was also from Chapter 1, Laboratory for Oligarchy. And it was talking through here and kind of talked about this earlier, was how they were using like Wisconsin and the Wisconsin, was it Club for Growth as a test case, right? To see what they could do in this one area where they had relative control, and then how do they export that across, other states in the Union. And the part that I want to read here, because we've talked about Citizens United quite a bit, and what we just talked about was there's public opinion polling out there, like you said, Joe, on certain issues. And this is one of them that a lot of people tend to agree on, that Citizens United should not be a thing, starting on page 24, the second paragraph in. So 80% of voters opposed the Citizens United decision, but O'Keefe saw nothing wrong with wealthy interests spending unlimited amounts to covertly influence political campaigns. That's inside baseball, he said. There's no moral issue involved. But progressive reformers like Robert La Follette had long viewed the concentration of wealth and power as the gravest threat to democracy. The tremendous influence of corporate power in the political realm, La Follette said in a 1897 speech, had led to a growing conviction in state after state that we are fast being dominated by forces that thwart the will of the people and menace representative government. More than a century later, it was particularly notable that the push to flood the political system with dark money was driven by the same forces that were behind efforts like voter suppression and gerrymandering, which accomplished similar goals through other means. We are facing a dual attack on our democracy, said the NAACP president, Ben Jealous. Every day, voters are being disenfranchised while corporations are being hyper-enfranchised. Wisconsin offered an early preview of the post-Citizens United political landscape. As the cost of federal elections increased by nearly $2 billion from 2008 to 2012, spending by outside groups in Wisconsin quadrupled in 2010 and 2012 compared to the two elections before Citizens United. In 2006, only 2% of outside political spending came from groups that did not have to disclose their donors. By 2010, that number had increased to 40%. Conservative social welfare groups like Wisconsin Club for Growth would outspend their liberal counterparts by nearly 5-1. By 2012, more than a quarter of all political contributions came from just 30,000 people who represented the 1% of 1%, the country's most elite and unrepresented minority. Not a single member of the House or Senate would be elected without their support. In that election, the top 32 super PAC donors gave as much money, $313 million, as Obama and Mitt Romney raised from their 3.7 million small donors combined. While money didn't always determine the outcomes, it usually did. 90% of U.S. House candidates who spent the most won.
Scary when the minority gets, embedded into the system. And I totally remember the day Citizens United happened because I was a political science guy at college and they made a big deal about it. And it was just like, it's atrocious that these corporations get defined as like people. They can make contributions, but they're not people because they can't be held accountable at all. And I'm really glad to see, I think just last month, Hawaii passed something to circumvent the whole Citizens United case by reclassifying how corporations can actually donate to these political campaigns. And now Oregon is up next, Maine is up next. So it's let's have these leftist, kind of progressive leaning states take the charge and get rid of this immediately. Because that's horrifying statistics that you presented.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where the laboratory for oligarchy can also be that laboratory for democracy. We can figure out ways in states to fight back against that, and hopefully that does spread. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is also why I'm always pushing for frameworks and different ways of perceiving things. If you get a good model that makes sense to people and you can implement it kind of easily, and that's what they did with Scott Walker and that whole right-wing thing. They found a good model and then they copied it and repeated. You just need to do the same thing in another way that leans more towards democracy and everything. Yeah, all that stuff you just read was really important and interesting. And I was just kind of reflecting on all the different ways that the ruling class will try to give fewer people a say. One way is to control the narrative, which is how the money factors in. The more money you spend, the more stories you can put out there and control the way people perceive things. The other thing is getting to control who gets to vote. And that's why enfranchisement has been such a big issue, and why women's suffrage and the right for Black people to vote has been such big landmark improvements moving toward democracy. But then you just see all these ways that they try to limit that. That's why mass incarceration is so big of a problem in this country. It's not just free labor for corporations who are still enslaving people through incarceration, which is the case, but it also disenfranchises them. They can't vote. You get convicted of a felony, you can't vote. When did we all agree that that was okay? The way that they mark out the districts, the way that they're attacking mail-in voting now. They want to find all these different ways to limit the number of people who actually participate, because the fewer people who participate, the fewer people whose perceptions you have to control, right? You don't have to control everybody's perceptions. You just have to control that class of people who actually vote, which is smaller and smaller. That's what they're going for anyway, less and less people voting.
It's funny too, because at the same time the Republican Party is touting we the people, or the will of the majority is it's put up there. But you're right, it's really a narrow sect that is voting, but it's the will of the majority, or even Nixon had that whole silent minority, whatever. I always thought it was so telling during election cycles. One party is saying everybody go vote, and one party is actively trying to stop the other people from voting. Which one do you think you should vote for? That's it.
Yeah, and Joe, your point there too is that whole first prologue with Buchanan and talking about how we need to get rid of people out of this country, and talking about deporting 30% of the country, goes right back to everything that is happening today. Right? They took 30 years for that to become mainstream, but yeah, that's just another method by which they're trying to use to maintain control and limit the voting population of the country.
There's this banger quote from John Adams on page 40. Maybe I'll just read the whole paragraph so that we have the context or whatever, but it's the second paragraph on page 40. Other prominent founders, including most of those gathered in Philadelphia, shared his concerns. The vast majority of American citizens were farmers or tradesmen of modest means. Virtually all the delegates owned large amounts of land. Many were extremely wealthy, and nearly half were slaveholders. Their views unapologetically reflected this class bias. The drafters of the Constitution had no conception that white people would one day become the minority, but they were keenly aware that they themselves were a distinct minority who needed to be shielded from the masses. Quote, John Adams said, "If a majority were to control all branches of the government," which he wrote in his 1786 treatise, Defense of the Constitutions of Government of the United States of America, "if a majority were to control all branches of government, debts would be abolished first, taxes laid heavy on the rich, and not at all on the others, and at last a downright equal vision of everything be demanded and voted." Oh, the chaos. Oh, the calamity. How horrible a vision that is. Like, they knew all along. They've known the whole time.
Like, it goes on, so we must do everything to stop that from becoming reality. That's funny.
What makes me think of Joe is like, we'll see how this plays out over the next 30 years, same way that it took, 30 years from Buchanan's speeches and whatnot to actually get to the point where that's mainstream political belief. But what I was going to say there was like, maybe we will have to thank Donald Trump someday for completely tearing down that veil and destroying the best propaganda the U.S. has had, which is that spreading of democracy, right? If you kept that up, probably could have kept this going for at least another, 20, 30, 40 years. But he's really kind of destroyed that and made people look at how we got to the spot, right?
Yeah, just totally destroyed the pretense of democracy, of fairness. I just have one thing, and it's a small thing, and it's really a point about reading, because I'm not trying to like pick on Ari Berman or anything. I don't have any grudge against him, but it's just a subtle way that you can, and you can do it with speech based on the things people say and the way they say them, but you can do it with writing a bit more easily to sort of see some, like maybe the writer isn't even aware of it sometimes. On page 46, the very top, page 46, he's writing about somebody named Randolph. It's carrying over from 45. He says, "The day after Randolph proposed that the House be apportioned according to the number of free inhabitants, Madison, who personally opposed slavery but nonetheless owned 9 enslaved people, rose and suggested that the phrase free inhabitants be struck out." So I'm just like, again, I'm not trying to pick on Ari Berman, but why write it that way? Why say Madison, who personally opposed slavery but nonetheless owned 9 slaves? Like, why say it that way? You know what I mean? Why try to sort of give Madison the cover, despite the fact that if you own slaves, you don't oppose slavery, right?
Yeah.
Full stop. If you oppose slavery, you wouldn't own human beings. But why write it that way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just kind of a subtle way that you can catch propaganda working in the way people write. I don't know. That phrase just really stuck out to me. And I was like, huh? Big question mark.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wonder where that came from. Like, is that well known? Did he write a book against slavery? Like, I don't know.
Just against this. Keep working. Like, yeah, you can't have both.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, there's such and I think that's more of just like the general propaganda about democracy in this country is like, so many of us really want to believe in the good intentions of the founding fathers. You know what I mean? Like it really, I don't know, it's emotional. It means a lot to people that the founders of this country were good, decent people who were nonetheless flawed. And I think that makes it hard for us to really see the depravity of what they were doing sometimes. Yeah, no, I sense a similar thing when I talk to my grandpa about politics, especially about the beginning of the country. He has all these religious notions about what the founders were doing, and they were godly people and this and that. And it's hard to point out to him that they were cruel slave owners and that, George Washington had enslaved people's teeth in his mouth. They weren't wooden dentures. He took teeth from human beings and put them in his mouth. Like, these aren't godly. I don't know what your notion of God is, but that all makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a hard thing to parse out sometimes.
there's writings from them during the time too, and they're not talking about like they know what they're doing, right? Like a lot of this is experimentation too, like in like this new country, right? Like it's not like they were like, oh no, this is definitely going to work. I can't find the last quote that I wanted to kind of leave this on, but it was more of what you were talking about, Joe, earlier with Pat Buchanan. You know, when he was talking about like how the founding fathers did not believe democracy, they did not believe diversity, they did not believe in equality. Like you read that quote, and how Pat Buchanan foresaw kind of like a culture war coming before most of like the rest of the Republican Party really saw what was about to happen. And the thing I wanted to highlight, to try and bring this back to the initial point or initial topic or initial point I raised at the beginning of this, was like watching this come as a reactionary cycle to progress that had been made, right? Like that, I think Ari Berman really lays that out well in the prologue, and then like going into those first two chapters of the book, like seeing how the country was initially created, the conflict that existed there, the slow progress over time to get more people brought into what they're calling a democracy and giving more people rights. And now this being that reaction to that and trying to push back to that. So 30 years, what it took, is what the book claims from, you know, Buchanan talking about these things. And it says, it's in the prologue here, it's talking about what Trump's opinion of Buchanan at the time was. And I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but he's a racist, he's an anti-Semite, like it's crazy, no one would vote for him. But now, like, Buchanan's platform is maybe even less extreme than the current MAGA platform. And so wrap that in this cyclical nature of, you know, hopefully we are part of whatever that wave is pushing back to get to more of a progressive and democratic union that, you know, was fought for by some and continues to be fought for. So that's kind of the last piece I wanted to leave this initial episode on. But yeah, anything you guys have you want to close out on?
I'll just kind of echo what you were saying and extend it a little bit. Idea about waves reacting to each other in the long course of culture. It's helpful to me as a person who's tends toward more cynicism the more I learn about the world, and it's hard to like not let that cynicism take over, that the good and the bad waves are happening at the same time, right? Just because that there is a right-wing fascist administration at the time, the consciousness of the general population is also progressing at the same time, that the general understanding of people in the world, in the country, the more information we have, the more access we have to media about what's going on all around the world, people are waking up to the bullshit on a bigger and bigger scale every day. And part of this fascist right-wing agenda is a desperate attempt to stop that raising consciousness, to stop that general growing awareness that's going on. And so if they're freaking out and trying to clamp down on everything, it means that something else is going right, is going in a good direction. And we have to continue to do our part as general people of helping each other parse through the bullshit, understand what is really going on, understand when oppression is taking place, understand when progress can be made. So yeah, trying to convince myself of that hopeful note that things are getting better at the same time that they are getting worse. And that's a hard reality to wrap our heads around sometime. Because we see so much of the bad, it's hard to remember that the good is also going on.
I think that my kind of thought here was, you know, Berman, he really presents this really well and like kind of structurally proves that we're definitely in a system, a democratic system that has these underpinnings of like anti-democratic structural elements. And those kind of two things have always been competing in the US. We always have this kind of like facade of we the people, and then we have the underlying actual structural elements that don't support that and, you know, really negate most of the people having a say. So yeah, I guess I'm trying to lean into like the hopefulness that he is making them visible right now and kind of seeing where it's going after this layout. So excited to like get into it. And it's really nice to have the Dawn of Everything and Howard Zinn in the background, because it really does give this kind of like push underneath it to ground it in its like reality rather than like what I was doing, which I think you were saying at the top, Cody, is like relaying it exactly to what is happening right now, which is what I was doing too. So it's cool to see both of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for tuning in to our first book episode of season 2. And we will be back in about 2 weeks with another core episode. And we'll be covering chapters 4, 5, and 6 of Minority Rule. So I think that's 2 weeks. So that will be June 23rd is our next core episode. And then June 25th is when we'll have chapters 4 through 6. So if you haven't listened through, catch up by then. And we will hopefully be back on your radio, car, or however you listen to us on the end of June. Thanks for listening. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening and hanging out with us.
If you enjoy the show, help us spread the word. Leave a rating or review and share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think would get something out of these conversations.
Your ratings, reviews, and shares help this show grow, and the more people listening, the harder it is for propaganda to win.
So until next time.
Stay aware, stay safe, and remember,
Propaganda loves you.